Hi everyone. Welcome to the Canva experience, interning at Australia's hottest startup. We are going to be having three speakers today, two of whom completed internships at Canva over the summer, and Jessica Beard, Canva's university programs manager. So Jess is going to be speaking first, then it's going to be Nick, and then it's going to be Jack. Take it away, Jess.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in from the comforts of your own home today. My name's Jess. I'm the University Programs Manager here at Canva. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the opportunities we have for students, Canva Live, and then you'll also be hearing from first-hand experience, Nick and Jack, about the projects that they worked on over the summer, this past summer that they interned with us at Canva. So I'm going to switch over to my presentation. I think I may disappear, but I'll just be the voice in the air that you hear. Okay. Does that look good? Okay. Awesome. So, Canva. If you haven't heard of us before, we are an online graphic design company. So if you are needing to design anything from an over-the-top Zoom background, which I'm sure is getting a lot of use at the moment, through to your first resume to land your first job, or building multi-million-dollar businesses, Canva is on a mission to empower the world to design. So that's literally empowering everyone to design anything with every ingredient in every language on every device with the best team in the world. So it's no small feat, and just casually democratizing the design process. Oops, sorry, two screens. So flashback to Canva's early days, where Mel and Cliff overtook Melanie's mum's living room. These are two of our founders in Perth, Australia. To now, we've never changed our two-step vision of building one of the most valuable companies in the world and doing as much good as possible. So how do you go from this office with some retro looking carpet through to over 900 employees with offices across the world, being dubbed the fastest tech company, growing tech company in the world, as well as being placed in the top 50 most innovative companies in the world, and just casually being worth 4.6 billion US dollars in a few short years. And also, little FYI, you become a part owner in Canva as an employee, so yay, we can all afford studio apartments in Sydney. But how do you go on such a massive journey? Well, we believe it's all based on our values and how our people embody those values in their everyday lives. So I'm going to show you a short clip of some of our team members chatting about them.
Where do you want me to look?
Wait, I'm not ready.
I'm a bit camera conscious though.
Do you know the purpose of this?
I have no idea what's going on. And action.
How would you describe our culture?
The culture here at Canva is all about creating a strong sense of belonging.
At an organisation like this, the culture kind of binds people together and helps them move in a certain direction.
It's probably the most cliche thing to say, but it always comes back to the people and the vibe around it.
I really enjoy coming into work every day because all my friends are here.
Feels like I'm at uni, but I'm doing something really nice for the world.
What are the values?
Our values, I think, set us apart.
The thing that struck me the most when I first came in here was the values.
Everything we do as the Vibe team are rooted in Canva's values.
The 6 values that we've got at the moment are be a force for good.
Be a good human, that's super important.
Set crazy big goals and make them happen. Empower others.
Make complex things simple.
Let's see.
There's 6 of them, right?
I always forget the 6th one just because there's 6 of them.
And pursue excellence.
That's the one, that's the swim lane one.
Everyone that we hire here in Canva embodies those values.
I've never cared so much about recycling before in my life. I've not encountered any other company who has a value that says be a good human.
At the end of the day, it's about us curating the kind of place where we do the best work of our lives.
Cut.
So no matter what your role is, where you're based, or what your goals are, our values act as a universal guide to help you do the best work of your life at Canva. Now, we have achieved everything up until a few weeks ago being face-to-face. So literally overnight, we turned into a distributed workforce. But to keep the vibe alive, we're putting in place a few initiatives to ensure that we're still productive and feel connected in today's new world. To start, we're continuing to support our suppliers who had previously delivered all of our food and flowers, with some of them having lost almost 90% of their income stream due to all of the office closures. So Canvanauts can opt to donate their lunch stipend to either receive a full box of seasonal fresh goodies, continue to support their local producers, or donate the money to Oz Harvest and Wayside Chapel. In addition to this, our chefs are cooking over 900 meals a week to deliver to Wayside Chapel and Oz Harvest for those homeless that are really in need right now. Friday night drinks has historically been a good time for everyone to come, relax, and connect with others and enter into the weekend. So we've turned to Zoom, and we are now having local talent streaming in every Friday night to keep the vibes high on a Friday. To have a little bit of a laugh, we have Slack channels from everything from working from home fashion to sing along, and having also Zoom backgrounds and just keeping the vibes high. So there's heaps of other initiatives, but it's really important that we continue to find some joy in the current situation. So how do you become a Canvanaut? We offer positions to either internships and graduates. So internships, you can come on board as a front-end, back-end software engineer, data scientist, or a UX designer. And for our graduates, we offer positions in front-end and back-end software engineering. Our internships are paid, and we also cover accommodation and flights for the duration of your time with us. In addition to this, you'll have access to everything our office, when we go back to normal, offers. So that's a gym with a health and wellbeing coach who runs multiple classes a day, which is remote now. Who knew you could get such a good workout in just using your body weight? I was not mentally prepared for that. Breakfast and lunch prepared daily by our in-house chefs. All the team events you could dream of, with expenses being covered by Canva, and of course a supportive mentor to guide you through your 12 weeks with us. For graduates, we do include a relocation assistance, so you'll be settling in and feeling like a Sydney-sider in no time. And we don't have a structured grad program, but what that means is you're able to be making impact to our 20 million monthly active users from day dot. I'm going to take you through a quick kind of overview of what the recruitment process looks like as well. This does vary slightly per role, but for our grads, it will include application. So that's your resume as well as your transcripts. Get creative with your resumes. There's a great platform called Canva, but we've received like presentations with links to people's GitHub, projects that you've worked on. Really, sky's the limit, and you really want to stand out. You'll have a call with our grad recruiter, Van. She'll take you through some technical questions and get to know you. You'll either go through to a technical 60-minute interview or a take-home challenge, dependent on the role, and a final interview. So for a software engineering graduate, you'll be looking at a 3-hour final interview with 4 sections, 3 technical and 1 values-based, and hopefully resulting in a job offer. And then for our software engineering intern process, it's a little bit shorter. You'll have your application as well. Same things apply. So your transcripts as well as your fun resume, call with Van, and a final interview, which is about 90 minutes long. So that will include technical and values-based questions, resulting in hopefully a job offer. So if you want to learn a little bit more, I've included this bit.ly link here. So it just runs through my presentation a little bit more in depth, includes links out to our job roles that we have available, and also a link to my LinkedIn So please connect if you have any questions. But that is all from me. I believe I'm going to try and hand over to Nick now. But yeah, thanks everyone.
Okay, hi everyone. Just bear with me a moment. Okay, so hi, I'm Nick. I interned at Canva over the summer, and not to spoil it, but I had a really good time. You may know me. I've been around UQCS for a bit. I was president last year. You probably got very tired of hearing me talk. I organized some events. I'm a fourth year software engineering student. I graduate mid next year. I'm on the committee for this year, so helping transition things over. I'm a tutor for 2310, 2002, so I may have commented you there as well. And I do research in automatic speech recognition with ITEE. So the big picture for this, the internship, I'd applied at quite a few places, heard back from several, but the Canva experience was a little different, and like obviously not Brisbane based like some of the other roles that I'd applied to. I ended up getting assigned to the security team, and which is part of the infrastructure group, but I'll get more into that later. So yeah, 12-week internship, Sydney, in Surrey Hills, so it's right near Central Station. Excellent commute. So how I got there, as Jess mentioned, I had a phone screen, so that was roughly 45-minute call with Van, and she asked about my projects, about my work history. Obviously satisfied with my answers, she passed me on to the interview, a couple of interviews, and I sat, I can't remember how long it was, but an interview, I'm thinking roughly an hour, with 2 programming questions with 2 Canva engineers, and that was done in Java. There was a couple of sort of interesting algorithmic massy questions, but it wasn't. It was more about can you code? Can you do the job effectively? Like, they're not expecting you to know the technical details. I know the graduate positions put a big focus on concurrency, so that's something that you can definitively study for. The intern interview was a little bit less hardcore from what I understand. And then about 3 weeks after the interview, I got an email from Van saying that they were offering me a position as an intern. So that was, that whole process took 4 or 5 weeks, which is significantly faster than some companies that I dealt with. So after the offer, which I obviously accepted, I was sent information from Canva HR to book flights. So they would pay for the flights. I would book the flights that I wanted. They had organized accommodation. So Jack and I shared an Airbnb sort of in the heart of Newtown. It was like 2 or 3 minutes walk to the shops, 2 minutes walk to the train. The whole commute was 20 minutes by train, or normally I would walk to work. It's a very nice area. And then, yeah, I'm at Canva. And getting to Canva was an experience. Like, obviously that first day, you sort of don't know anything. You don't know where you're going. You don't know where the place is. But as soon as I walked in the door, I was made to feel welcome. And we sort of sat down. Now I'll probably come back to this a few times, but the food at Canva was just like sort of out of this world. And like that morning when we walked in, like mountains of avocado, fresh fruit, fresh baked bread, sort of in-house. It was a lot to take in at the beginning. I did get quite used to it by the end, and definitely missed it when it was gone. But after I'd walked in, we did some onboarding stuff. We got to meet the other interns. There were roughly 30 of us. I guess it was good having Jack there as well, because it meant that I sort of wasn't alone going through that experience. I knew at least somebody. And yeah, so we the first couple of weeks were very onboarding heavy. Like we had to learn the Canva system, and for reasons I'll talk about, I didn't touch a lot of the system because I was working on a sort of meta level project. But after that sort of first morning, I got to meet my mentor. My mentor, Wei, is absolutely incredible programmer, very into functional programming and Haskell, and endeavored to teach me some of the stuff. When I learned functional programming in the States, it was in ML, so a few things didn't transfer, and I don't know if I'll ever be quite as good as he is at it, but he did attempt to teach me. And that and sort of enhancing my knowledge of Python. But again, I'll get to that. So my first question, they had prepared me somewhat, and I guess I was a little bit surprised by the job that I'd been assigned. It was much more research oriented, like I mentioned, much more meta than I was expecting. I was kind of expecting to work on product, but what I got was so much better from my perspective, coming from a research background. It was, I had been warned that I would need compilers knowledge. I hadn't taken compilers, but I had a peek through the recommended reading material. And the job was a bit of a moonshot. It was kind of very much experimental, very much, this isn't going into production anytime soon, but how would you like to try it anyway? And there was it was absolutely a voluntary thing. It was are you happy doing this? Was the question that I got a lot over those first couple of days, and I was sort of ecstatic to give it a try. It wasn't. I said I was on the security team. It's not a security project really. You could put a security spin on it, but I was asked if I wanted to help build a Bash transpiler. So for those of you that don't know, Bash is a shell-based language, and it's a sort of an extension on what was a more simple shell. And shell and its various variants are domain-specific language for manipulating data. So it's very dense, it's very heavy, and we'll see some examples of it. But when you type in the terminal on the Linux machine, you're typically working in Bash. And the reason that I was asked to do this is that Canva, even as a relatively speaking, a young company, has over 100,000 lines of Bash in its various repos and monorepo. And the problem with Bash is that it's so very dense. Oh gosh, sorry, bear with me. It's so very dense that it's difficult to deal with in a time of crisis. Like, it's great at manipulating information, yes, but if you're trying to work out what's going wrong in a Bash script that boots up one of your clusters, and you're time pressured, it's very easy to miss something in all of that density. So the question that I got often was why, like from people inside the company that I talked to, from people outside the company, at my friends at other companies, was like, why bother? Like, how could this possibly work? And what value is it going to bring? So the idea here is that we would take Bash scripts in infrastructure, and because there's so much of it, translating them by hand would cost a great deal of money and doesn't bring any immediate value. It brings sort of long-term value and sort of sustainable code, reducing tech debt effectively. But I guess despite all of the doubt, we pushed on. And transpiling isn't exactly new, right? So I took, over the course of the project, I took a lot of inspiration from Babel. And Babel has been doing this for ages. This is every time you create a project in JavaScript using fancy new language features, in order to get that to work on all of the myriad browsers, you'll typically transpile, or that it's when you're working within a language, it's compiling typically, but the process and the concept is the same. Yeah, and you transpile it to, so you take those modern language features and basically translate them back into the traditional JavaScript that every browser supports. So you can see here, there is this, that they've put new JavaScript, so in this case, string interpolation, and then in real time, it's translated that into JavaScript that would work on any browser on the right-hand side. And we wanted a similar thing, effectively. So I guess another analogy that might be more familiar to some of you that haven't done compilers yet is something like this, where we have language on one side and we want to translate it into another language. There is some sort of semantic meaning and syntax that we can extract from that in order to translate reliably. So the way that this is done with natural language, you extract the grammar, you build a syntax tree, you do some pre-processing to get to a common format, then you feed it into a translation engine for the specific language, because each language has its own sort of idiosyncrasies. The formatting might be different. It might be right to left instead of left to right. And then, so you take that process, right? And the process for translating programming languages is very similar. So you take a shell script or bash script. We targeted bash because it's very commonly used. There are other shell interpretations, but we targeted bash. Now, there was an existing tool called shell check. I'll talk about that more in a moment. And that produces an abstract syntax tree. And we pass that off to something called an AST, or abstract syntax tree handler, to get an intermediate representation, and then we pass it through a generator instead of a translation engine to get target language source code. Now, the idea here is that this intermediate representation is sort of universal, the same way that the natural language one was in a common format. So the idea is that you could do it for anything. Now, I was given the option of Python or TypeScript as a target language, and I'm not familiar with TypeScript, so I very quickly noped out of that option. But I am reasonably familiar with Python. I became a lot more familiar with Python as time went on, but I became even more familiar with Bash and Shell and all of the weird and wonderful things that it, and terrible things that it can do. So let's talk through this process, right? So this is, there's an example of some shell. We've got, we're iterating through a range. We're printing out the current item, and we're calling a function that you can't see. But we'll get to that. Now, shell check. Shell check is an existing program written in Haskell, thousands and thousands of lines of Haskell. And if you know how dense Haskell is, it's impressive. But if you've ever written a shell program inside an IDE with plugin support, you probably had shell check recommended to you to tell you whether you're writing terrible bash or not. It recommends best practices. It was written by a guy named Vidar Holden, and we owe him a lot because he cut the production time of this process down a heap by passing the shell script for us and outputting an abstract syntax tree for us in JSON. So much time saved. And you can see here, this JSON has each element of the syntax gets turned into a tag. So in this case, a T-literal. And the contents, and this is line number or row, column number, and then the call. So go back, you can see there was a call to "Don't you like Bash?" and now we've got the text of "Don't you like Bash?", its place in the code, and what type of tag it is. So we take that AST and we pass it off into an AST handler. So this is a bit that I got to work on a portion of. Some of the work had already been done by Wei, and it outputs Python objects. So the Python objects are our intermediate representation. You can see here, this is the output from PyCharm. And you can see like each element has arguments, entities, it has a Boolean can have entities. So is that can it have children, that sort of thing. So we've now got this tree-like structure. And then finally, we pass through this generator, and the generators are made up of these functions called handlers. And you have one handler for each type of syntax. So you have a handler for for loops, and you have a handler for built-in functions and that kind of thing. And then you pass it through the generator. It calls the handler for each element in the intermediate representation tree, and you get back target language source code. So this is an example of a handler. So this is handling a glob pattern, which we'll, I believe, see an example of later on. So you can see it's getting past the generator object. It's getting past the glob pattern. So that's the actual Python object from the intermediate representation, and some keyword arguments that we may or may not use. We do some extraction. We try and work out what the pattern is, see whether it starts or ends with things. This may not be fully implemented, but it doesn't have to be. Like you can build this up piece by piece. And one of the most satisfying things about this project was the feedback loop. The feedback loop was for the first 90% of the project was every 30 minutes, I got to implement a new handler or a new part of a handler when they got complex. And given that I was used to working with 12-week feedback loops in automatic speech recognition, this was amazing. So the other thing that came up repeatedly was when Python just didn't operate in the same way that Bash did. So there was no way around the syntax differences. So the example that I've got up on screen here, if you look in the bottom left, we've got a shell script. It's got this weird syntax. So it's basically if it's checking whether this exists. If it doesn't exist, then return. Putting return here doesn't work in Python. You cannot do that. And you can't put pass there either. So what I did, what I did was created a new function called no-op, and that no-op simulates this return in places that pass can't go. But yeah. So when you transpile this with this no-op function, it'll import the no-op function at the top of the file. It's a little messy, but it's and it will get messier as those polyfills get longer. But the polyfill is the concept of this function, the thing that you input in order to get over these language impediments. And I'll show you another one, a bigger one, shortly. But the point is that they get inserted into the code and then called where they should be in order to let that function happen. So this is another one. This is the pipe polyfill. So this one is much longer. But what it does is it lets you do piping like this, bash piping like this. So you can pipe, I have to pause that. Yeah, you can pipe a bash command And it gets tricky when there are combinations of built-ins that we have written Python code for and some that we're just calling out to. So here, we're just calling out to cat. We didn't want to re-implement cat just yet. So we're calling out to it, we're piping it to word count, and then we're appending that to the file bob.txt. So it lets you write short, but it does mean that there's this class somewhere. Ideally, we'd have this class in some sort of package that we'd inject into the Python distribution. So you wouldn't have to have that. You just have an import statement at the top. But there are a lot of things that I would like to work on in future on this, but didn't get a chance in the 10 weeks that I had. So here's another example. This one's a little bit longer in Bash, and probably the best example of how we managed to take the Bash and produce something Pythonic. So the idea here is that we didn't want the produced code to just be Bash like Python. Like we wanted something more out of it. We wanted it to be readable, valuable code. And in order to do that, like you have to give special care, I guess, to how you implement those handler functions. And implementing those handler functions, you kind of need to know the language that you're working into. So here, like the difference between for I and 1 to 5, like Bash does those inclusively. Bash also initializes variables that aren't used to the empty string, which is horrifying, but it does, you're sort of making trade-offs the whole time between making it faithful to the old language and making it valuable new code. So here's another example. This is a full way through kind of example. So we've taken this sort of working Bash code and used the tool, translated it. You can see me fail to exit Vim. And then we're going to run it. And it's going to do the same thing that it did in Bash, but now in Python. So that's the kind of behavior that we want. Now it gets exponentially harder when you have people using non-standard Bash practices. You have people using sort of esoteric functionality that is perfectly fine part of Bash, but is sort of harder to implement in Python. Things like here strings and here docs. Now it did implement them, but the interactions between different elements is still where this project needs work. So it does function. Sometimes it needs more exposure. It needs more people using it. And you can see this tool, this interactive playground that I built. That was one of the sort of fun diversions. So Babel has this, as you saw in that screenshot. And I wanted to see if I could make one. And it took me 3 days to get it working. It took me 2.5 days trying to figure out how to get TypeScript to be nice. And then after I dropped TypeScript, it took 2 hours. Obviously, I was being particularly pragmatic at this stage. But yeah, so this is how I built it. It's in Python. The generators and the AST handlers are all in Python. Set up full CI on GitHub. Obviously, there was that Haskell dependency. We had Poetry. Poetry is amazing. Poetry is a package management system, the dependency management system for Python, and it's fantastic. It basically brings all of the benefits of the NPM infrastructure to Python. So you get lock files, you get decent dependency resolution. It's just amazing. And then the front end, Material UI, React, not TypeScript, Flask, Python, and I built this shell 2 Python part into a library, a Python library. So it can be imported and used as an API, which we did for this. So the question that I was asking as I went through and sort of was explained to me and my experience was that they were sort of assessing my performance, how I went with all of this throughout. The midway through, I had to sit down with Wei. Wei is really good at giving feedback, really good at telling you actionable things that you can improve on. I was able to take that information and roll with it. You also give at the end of your time, so sort of that week 11 of 12, you give a final presentation to your group. So in this case, it was to the infrastructure group. That was about 70-ish engineers in the group. I'm sure less than that came. The room, there might have been 50 people there. Depending on how that goes, depending on the feedback from your mentor and an independent assessor, you may or may not get an offer. So we got an offer in the last week. That obviously may differ in future weeks. But yeah, the process was reasonably stress-free, as much as that sort of thing can be, I guess. So at Canva, they have this concept of kudos, and it takes the form of a Slack channel, and you can just drop thank yous into their public thank yous so that people get recognized for the work that they do. And I just wanted to thank most of all my mentor Wei. I learned an incredible amount, not just about programming, not just about like how things work at Canva, but sort of an approach to life as a software engineer, sort of in the long term. To the security team, to Seb for patiently explaining InfoSec. I'm not an InfoSec person. People who looked carefully at the schedule for last year could see that InfoSec wasn't my priority. I apologize to those of you where it is, but it was fascinating to be involved in that. I didn't get a whole heap of like production work exposure in security, but I definitely had sort of the project of my dreams to work on, and they gave me the leeway and the feedback when I needed it. To DataEng, so for my last 2 weeks, I worked with Jack's team, DataEng. I had sort of gotten the project to a milestone that Wei and I were happy with. In order to give me a taste of production work at the company, DataEng found some work for me to do in monitoring and assessing resource limits for their Kubernetes clusters. So that was fascinating. I got exposure to Datadog and Kubernetes and seeing how all of that worked. And a big thank you to Jess for making Canva as welcoming as it was. Definitely wouldn't be the same without you there. And not listed here, but a big thank you to Jack for putting up with me, for putting up with my extensive use of the aircon in our shared apartment. Yeah, and this is the intern cohort, or most of us from 2019, 2020. Great bunch of people, and a lot of them are at Canva already or have accepted offers to come back. So hopefully you'll get to meet some of them. They are great people. And that's it for me. I will stop sharing and hand over to Jack.
Amazing. Thank you, Nick. Thanks for the kind words as well. So let me work out how to share my screen. Alrighty, let me have a look. Is my screen sharing okay? And can everyone hear me? All right, I'm going to take that as a yes. Awesome. Alrighty. So let me just quickly tab back to this. Alrighty. So hi, friends. My name is Jack, and thanks for sticking around to listen about my internship experience at Canva. Also, a fair warning, Nick has some amazing design talent that he refuses to give me some of. And so my slides won't look nearly as good as his. That's why I got put last. I've called this talk Moving Inside, but I've realized now that it might be more relevant to the current times than my actual project. So we'll just move on from there. So who am I? I'm Jam, or Jack, depending on the context. I'm currently completing my 5th year of my 4-year Bachelor of Engineering, majoring in software. I've also been helping to run UQCS since late 2018, and I'm finishing my stint on committee this Saturday. And why am I here? I worked as an intern for Canva over the summer, and I'm from UQ, so no big surprises there. And finally, I'm running away to Sydney in July to start full-time work if they let me across the border. So a tradition here at Canva is sharing fun facts. So I'm going to share my Canva-related fun fact for you all. With 500 employees, I was the first Jack at Canva, and I was able to secure the cover to jack@canva.com. This is particularly awesome because for those of you who don't know, Jack is consistently one of the most popular names in Australia. And why wouldn't it be? It's a great name. But yeah, that's my fun fact. So from July, you can call me, you can email me at jack@canva.com. So what did I actually do at Canva? As Nick mentioned, Canva assigns interns to mentors located throughout the company. And for my internship, I was placed into the data engineering team at Canva to work with the Canvalytics team. My project has no sweet name like Shell 2, and it's simply called the Amplitude Worker to keep things nice and consistent. So to give a little bit of organizational context for my project, the data engineering team is just one of 3 core teams that make up data at Canva. The other 2 teams are the data analysts and the data scientists. The dichotomy here is that analysts are generating valuable insights into how customers are using Canva, and the scientists are using data to create models that improve the Canva experience, for example, search and other interesting models. All 3 teams are broken down into various sub-teams that work on separate projects. For my team, data engineering, the team again splits down into 3 separate sub-teams. There we have platform, warehouse, and Canvalytics. The platform team works to develop tooling used by the data scientists and the data analysts for their work. The warehouse team maintains and cleans the data warehouse. And finally, the Canvalytics team is the primary point of ingestion for all of Canva's analytics data. But Canvalytics wasn't always around. And in fact, Canvalytics only got switched on during my time at Canva. And before Canvalytics, we had Vendor. For reasons, I won't intentionally mention the vendor's name, but I might slip up, so forget if I do. The best way to describe Vendor is they're like a massive octopus that gobbles up lots of data and then redistributes this event data through its tentacles to a swathe of other vendors or custom platforms for analysis or storage. And it's a great tool for bootstrapping analytics, and they provide an awesome schema for structuring analytics events. But like a lot of vendors, the tooling they provide is expensive at the scale that the data team and Canva wanted to operate, and didn't provide enough customization in a few key areas. So this presented a unique business opportunity to develop Canvalytics, which means bringing the analytics ingestion internal and hence creating my project. So what was my project? And what is the Amplitude Worker? Well, first, a little bit more context. Amplitude is a tool for analyzing event data produced by users to allow for quick and easy insight by analysts into how customers are using Canva. Most importantly, Amplitude has some really awesome funnel analysis for A/B testing user conversions. And it also has a really, really cool low latency interface for analyzing event data almost as soon as we land it to Amplitude. So the user context for my project, I'll run you through kind of like the data loop at Canva. So almost everything in coding runs in a loop, and this project is no different. So we have engineers, and engineers write code that we deploy to Canva. Engineers also write code that generates data when users do something on the platform. And as you can see on the right-hand side there, we have our user, and he's clicking on Canva, and from that, he generates JSON payloads that we send to Canvalytics. So Canvalytics is the ingestion tool, which will offload the event data as we get it to the warehouse for storage. And we also offload it live to Amplitude. Now, previously, the vendor would offload the data to Amplitude for us. But going forward, we weren't going to be using vendor. And so we had to replace that link. And that was my project. Continuing on from there, we have analysts and scientists, primarily the analysts, who provide information that look at this data and they analyze it and provide some business insights. And they give that feedback back to the engineers, who then write more code to put into Canva that generates more data. And so we have this, you can see here, we have this nice loop that we can iterate through. So yeah, my part was just fixing that small link there between Canvalytics and Amplitude. So for this talk, I don't actually have access to a whole bunch of my source material. So instead, I'm going to focus more on the process that I went through for my internship. And I think this is something that doesn't usually get perfectly communicated when applying for internships. As mentioned prior, at Canva, interns are assigned mentors or hosts that guide them through a specific project that aligns with their team goals, usually. So to complete this project, I went through 5 main steps. Conveniently, this template also had 5 dot points on this slide, and I definitely didn't fit my steps to the slide template. So step 1 is to learn. I had very little experience with the technology stack when I rocked up at Canva. And if I was going to be using it and making a project that works, I had to learn it. And so I spent probably a good 1 to 2 weeks learning the tools. And then for Scala, I spent the rest of my internship learning Scala. But big piece of advice if you do get an internship is to take your time to learn the tools that you're going to be using. It'll make life at the other end of the internship so much easier. So yeah, like I said, I had to learn Scala for my project. Data engineering at Canva is all done in Scala. So I highly recommend, if you are going to be learning, Functional Programming Principles in Scala by Odersky. Odersky is like one of the fathers of Scala. He has a Coursera course up there. Really, really good. I didn't make it all the way through because I needed to actually start writing code before I understood Scala and functional programming in full. I also recommend Functional Programming in Scala by P. Chiasano. It's a book. Highly recommend it. I used it a lot when I was traveling over the Christmas break because I didn't have access to the internet. And it has a lot of really good resources in it. The other thing I would recommend is Max Bow has, I don't have the link for it, but Max Bow, who's a member of UQCS, has a great GitHub repository with a whole bunch of information about Scala in it. And I highly recommend looking it up. And if you ask nicely, he might give you access to his Notion. I apologize in advance, Max, for all the messages you're about to receive. Terraform and AWS was also something that I didn't know and had to learn as well. The AWS docs are really good. Basically, you just spend your time reading them and understanding what the tool you're trying to use does. And working from their existing best practices is also a great way to learn quickly. Your company's probably already done what you're trying to do in a slightly different way. So if you can take that design, that best practices design, and replicate it for your project, that's the quickest way to get going there. And my small flex here is that I did make one PR to the AWS docs. While I was there at Canva. And also Kubernetes. Kubernetes, like same thing as AWS, has some great documentation in there. Scaling and how scaling works can be a little confusing when you're trying to tune for performance. And there were a few other niche tools in there that I had to learn for YAML smithing, namely JSON. So step 2 of my internship was research. So as I explained earlier, my Amplitude worker needs to connect Canvalytics to the Amplitude. And Canvalytics has a different data representation, represents event data in a slightly different way to how Amplitude expects it. And so what we have to do is work out how we're going to do these transformations to preserve the integrity of the data. Because the vendor does it one way, we needed to copy the way that they were doing it, so that when we switched over to the new Amplitude worker, we didn't end up with these data transitions that meant that our old analytics were different from our new analytics. So it was really important to spend time researching how they did how their process went through. and making sure that my code worked fairly similarly to their code. The next thing was like, how was I going to integrate the infrastructure? This project integrates with an existing service, so Canvalytics. And so it was important to work out how I was going to work with them to deliver this service, and making sure that both teams are on the same page was really important. So as part of the research process, there was a few meetings there to discuss how that was going to work. And then the final thing, which is the big thing, was how I was going to structure the code. It's also the fun bit, I found. It involves things like failure modeling, testing, reusability, readability, and of particular interest was the pattern we used for wrapping event message payloads, because these message payloads weren't yet in an enforceable structure. And so we couldn't directly map them into objects in code. And so we had to do some manual JSON wrapping there, which we used a facade pattern for, which was really nice. And as you can see on the left here, there's a queue drive. There's a small like representation of my code. So there's a queue driver there. The queue driver pulls in messages from SQS, which is a queue. So it pulls messages off the queue, passes them to a message handler, which sends them to the mapper, and the mapper transforms the messages. The message handler then takes those transform messages, and and passes them to the service. The service then looks at those messages, and if any of them failed, it'll send them it'll send them somewhere to be dealt with later. Otherwise, it gets sent to the client, which sends them onto Amplitude. And that's a rough structure of my code. So after all that complicated research that made me think everything was going to be harder than it needed to be, the first step was actually getting the system bootstrapped. And this is bootstrapping is the simplest end-to-end form of any system. In my case, it was a single ingestion queue with no failure modeling, a single pod on the Kubernetes cluster, that didn't scale. It was just one pod deployed, and that one worker is sending messages that are of a minimal valid form to the Amplitude API. For reference, EKS here is the Amazon Web Services managed Kubernetes cluster service that is used at Canva. So this bootstrapping process is really, really important, because again, it forms one of those important loops in writing code, which is that we can write code, we can push the code to a repository, we can get it reviewed by somebody, we can then build the code, and we can deploy it and keep adding to the system. Once this is up and running, you can keep doing that iterative process and ticking off goals as you work through the project. So step 4 was implement, and this is where I spent most of my time. This is building out the business logic. So I was adding meat to the payloads, so adding more and more data, more and more transformations to push to this Amplitude endpoint, all the while continuously deploying to that bootstrapped infrastructure so that I could see it running in production, essentially. I established some gold tests. So I took some production data and I mapped it manually and through a few tools to make sure that what I was doing was correct. And I also spent a lot of time failure modeling. So this is a really important part, especially with analytics tooling. And all message systems in general, is what do we do when something fails? So rather than dropping it on the floor or having the system fall over, it was important to work out why it failed and putting it somewhere where it could be dealt with later. So what this event ended up being was a whole bunch of extra dead letter queues, which are just SQS queues, and a lot of error messages attached to those little bits and pieces. And the final step is scale and test. A good mantra that I learned while I was at Canva is make it work, make it right, and make it fast. So if this gets you, like, make it work means we're going to get it the system running, so that we can see some stuff happening. So are we dropping messages on the floor? Are things making it to the other end? Can we monitor the system? How do we know it's dropping messages on the floor? And will we be alerted when it fails? So that's the process of making it work. The next step was to make it right. So this was evaluating it against some gold tests and giving it to the analysts to evaluate as well. It was testing it against the production system. So there was a period there where I ran it side by side with an existing production system to see that what we were doing was correct. And it was also about evaluating those metrics that we output. So are we getting the same metrics that we would have if we were using the old system? And then making it fast. That's the final thing. Everything before that, it can be expensive. It doesn't matter. The final thing you can do is make it fast, because you can always leave it to be slow and come back to it later. So making it fast is simple. Can it handle peak load? At Canva, Canva generates, when I was there, about 4,000 messages a second at peak load. I believe that's going to be, the goal was for that to increase significantly after I left. And so the next question is, does it scale appropriately? So I spent a lot of time working out, making sure the system would scale when when it was receiving more messages. So assigning more workers into that Kubernetes cluster and scaling out horizontally the system. And the final step is always can we make it faster? So this is simply just doing some basic analysis of your code, making sure you're optimally using your memory and you haven't got any some wasted processing in there. And ta-da, we're done. Smithed all the JSON, smithed all the YAML, plumbed all the JSON, and project is complete. Not quite. So I left a few things undone when I was there. Unfortunately, as an intern, you only get a limited amount of time, so you can't do everything that you want to do usually, especially on a project like this. A few things that I left behind was scaling latency. So the scaling model that I used caused messages to be delayed slightly because I was going for efficiency rather than being a low latency system, and also because the monitoring system wasn't quite up to scratch. And that leads into my next point, which is better monitoring. I really hope I didn't wake anybody up with some bad bugs, but this code did make it into production as far as I know. And somebody else was on call for it and not the intern who left the company. So I really hope I don't do that. If I go back and someone's not talking to me, I'll understand why. And then transitioning the system, I didn't actually get this thing running instead of our production system. That's a much larger story that might take a month in and of itself because of the way these data systems work. You never want to lose data because that's super critical to the business analysis. But when all is said and done, this code will be in production full time, and it will be the first. As I understood it, it was going to be the first Kubernetes service running in a Kubernetes cluster at Canva. Again, some big kudos, and the reason I got this done, Wade, who's on my team, he did all my code review, and he sat next to me as well. He was also the one person on the team who didn't leave me at some point or other, even though it was me and him just left in the office by ourselves. Greg, who was my mentor, talented data engineer, very, very switched on, great with his tools, and was awesome at fixing Kubernetes whenever I broke it and blew up the cluster. And the rest of data engineering was also amazing. They answered all of my questions, and they also helped me when I broke things, working on things that I wasn't supposed to. And that was my project finished. So what happens next? With most internships, there's a lot of uncertainty about how you transition from being from a full-time role, being an intern into a full-time role, especially at the end of your internship. Because like a dog catching a truck, you've landed the big one and you never thought much further than that. The cool thing is that at Canva, the process is super simple. If you've been giving it a go, working through the problems on your project and that your project presents, and you're 90% of the way there to getting an offer, which I did. I'm starting full-time for Canva in July, and pending COVID-19, should be moving to Sydney around that time as well. And the reality is that you're also in a great position to join Canva. When I started my internship, there were 500 employees. Now Canva is close to 1,000 employees. So there really is an amazing appetite for growth and to hire. And it's also one of the best internships in Sydney if you're looking for one. The relocation support is amazing. The culture is amazing. You'll have a ton of fun, and you're going to learn so much doing an internship there. Like I said, I'm pretty biased. So with all of this, so take it all with a grain of salt. But Canva was a great place to intern. Like I said, relocation assistance, awesome mentorship program and training program as well. There's amazing people, and the food is to die for. Avocado on toast for breakfast every day was a great motivator to get into work nice and early. Yeah, if you have any questions, pop them in chat, or please reach out to me on Slack or any other platform you can find me on. And past July, you can always email me at jack@canva.com. And I'm always keen to read resumes and help you work on yours. It's a pet favorite of mine. So if you're interested in getting a resume reviewed, send it through. I'll have a look at it, and I often pass them on to a few people who are looking for people to hire as well. So yeah, thanks for letting me talk.
Okay, cool. Does anyone else have anything else to add? Jess, do you want to say a few words, or Nick, or Jack again?
No, I think if you do have any questions, like Jack said, I'm in the background on the UQCS Slack channel. So if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Applications are open for all internship and graduate opportunities right now. We will be closing internship applications towards the end of June. So sooner is definitely rather than later. But yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. Like Jess and everyone else said, apply for Canva. Is it also on a rolling basis, or not? Yeah. Anyways.
Sorry,
Yeah.
is that question?
I don't think
internships
internships aren't on a rolling basis, but graduate positions, as I understand, are on a rolling basis.
Yeah.
So you can apply for a graduate position whenever you want, and you can start whenever you want as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Point being, apply for Canva. Yeah, thanks again everyone for tuning in. We have our SGM this Sunday, and then we have a talk by Harold Liu on resumes and stuff. So come to that as well. And on Tuesday, we have a talk by famed computer scientist Cristina Cifuentes. Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in again. I'm not sure when the stream is going to end.
Soon. Oh, if there's any questions, pop them in the chat, and I'll answer them in the chat as well on YouTube, or you can ping me on Slack as well.
It's done now.